This video is about fun photography projects for kids and adults. Whether you're a parent, a grandparent, a teacher, a babysitter, you're always looking for fun activities that are both educational and entertaining. Photography is such a powerful tool. You adults and kids can benefit in so many different ways. We live in a visual world. The visual skills that you can learn with photography will benefit you for the rest of your life. Please pay it forward by sharing this video with friends and family, or teachers, or babysitters. There'll be links in the information box below for each one of these photography projects. It's been proven that kids and grown-ups learn better by physically getting involved in an activity rather than just watching a video or reading a book about a new technique. So I encourage you to actually try some of these projects when you're done watching the entire video. Now, with no disrespect to my smartphone photographers, these photography projects for children or grown-ups will work better with either a DSLR or a point-and-shoot camera where you can change the camera setting. They're designed for kids, but they'll work great for you too. Let's dive in. Project number one is called Creative Selfies. And no, it's not those photos that the teenagers do in front of the bathroom mirror. It's really popular for kids, and it's really good practice for photographers at any skill level. You can get really creative and have a lot of fun honing your skills at both composition and lighting. Try using reflections, use shadows, use any interesting props. I was so against doing the selfie thing, but I tried a few years ago, and it ended up being kind of fun and actually educational. I like being behind the camera instead of in front of the camera. But I stepped out of my comfort zone and surprised myself. I even created a Facebook page dedicated to creative selfies. So for more ideas, you can look at Pinterest, and you can also look at Google Images to get some ideas on how you can do some cool, creative selfies of you or your child. All right, the next photo project for adults and for kids is shadow photos. I had a lot of fun with this when I was a student in photography school in the early 80s. Oh my God, that was almost 40 years ago. It's another fun exercise where you'll be playing around with lighting and composition. It's another project where you can use any camera. All right, I wrote down a couple tips for shadow photos. Number one, you need a sunny day. And remember that late in the day and early in the day, the shadows will be a lot longer. Sometimes the most interesting photos are when you strictly have the shadow of the subject in the photo. And other times, the more interesting photo will be having the subject and the shadow both included in the photograph. Using a flashlight is great for creating shadows when you're in the dark, whether it's inside or at nighttime. Once again, just have fun with it. Use your imagination. And use the link in the description box below the video. Playing around with photo project number 3 will give you some insight into understanding lighting and exposure. I got the idea for this project way back in the mid-1970s when I was in high school, and I had a subscription to Popular Photography magazine. There was an article called Painting with Light. The photographer and an associate set up a camera on a tripod at top of a big hill overlooking a very big valley. And they opened up the exposure and literally drove around the valley. I think the exposures were like 10-15 minutes long with a torch, one of those hazard lights throughout the valley. And they recorded this cool, winding, glowing light. And so I thought I'd try it. A friend and I would try it. So I decided I'd try a smaller version of the same thing, and there was a local recreation area not too far from my home, so a buddy of mine set up one night, with a camera on top of a small hole looking down into this recreation area, and we used an electronic flash, through gels. He got one of those road hazard flares. We also had a flashlight, and we got some really cool photos from Painting with Light. And then again, in photography school, we had a Painting with Light assignment where we went into this industrial building at night when it was closed, and we had to light up electrical and I don't know what kind of big machines they were, just with using portable light and shining in different directions in complete darkness with the shutter open on our cameras for, oh, I don't remember, but a couple minutes. All right, so it's 9 o'clock, it's dark, I'm down in my basement, set up in front of the billiards table, and I have side-by-side cameras. You're looking at the video, but there's another camera right next to that. And so we're going to turn off the lights. You'll be able to watch what I'm doing, I think. It's going to come out pretty dark. We'll see if it changes to automatic and it gets a real slow shutter speed. But I'm going to paint the word wow, and this is a good example of how you can just kind of have fun experimenting with light painting. Here we go. Don't panic when the lights go off. So I'm using a tiny little flashlight. I cover it up, and then I click the timer on the other camera, and the shutter opens for 30 seconds. I expose the flashlight. I aim it down. There's the W I'm doing. Cover it. Then I do the O. And then I do another W. I cover it up. The 30 seconds ends, and I got my photo. Let's check. All right, we are outside for example number 2 of light painting. Sorry for the chimes. We're just walking around the backyard, stepping under the wood pile, show off the tree a little bit. Lighten up the fence. See what happens. Cheating, I'm only using one camera. So now we're going to shoot the still. Project number 4 is motion blur. And there are several different variations of this, but they all have one thing in common, where either the subject or part of the subject has some blur from some kind of motion. You may have seen an example of one of these types of motion blur photos with sports photography, where part or all of the athlete is blurred from really fast motion. So I'll show you a couple interesting motion blur photos that I took just for this video. One of the ways you can create blur is by zooming the lens during the exposure. You set your camera on shutter priority and use a slow shutter speed that allows you to create the motion while the photo is being taken. So with this photo, I did 4 stops. I did 4 seconds. I started it like this. I quick went like this. I quit went like this. And I quick went like this. And then it was a 4-second exposure, and this is the photo that came out. Here's another example of blur from zooming during the exposure. Exposure time was about a half a second. You can try the zooming technique without a tripod, but I think it works better with one. Also, using a simple background will give you a simpler photograph, and if you have a busy background, you'll have a lot more going on in your finished photo. You can also create motion blur by moving your camera during the exposure, whether it's rotating it along the axis of the lens, or whether you move it up and down during the exposure, or even side to side. There's a lot of trial and error, so you just have to kind of do little variations. With that zooming technique we already talked about, I find it better to start the zoom before you push the shutter button, and then continue zooming until after the exposure is over. Have fun making little changes in your technique. You'll have plenty of failures. Everybody does, but that's how you learn. All right, on to photo project number 5. We're going to go on a treasure hunt. The treasure hunt project has a lot of possibilities. For instance, you could focus on just one single characteristic of your subject, like the color red, and just photograph things that are red. Another characteristic you could focus on would be just curvy objects or rectangular objects. You could also hunt for textures or patterns or something with repeating elements. What happens is you get practice at composing. You improve your composition when you're focusing on just one theme. You could also try photographing everything with your lens set at its widest angle setting or its strongest telephoto setting. How about doing a treasure hunt where you're photographing everything as close as your lens will allow? Like I said earlier, the possibilities are endless. It's such a great time to be interested in digital photography. If you found this video at least somewhat helpful, please subscribe to my channel. Click that little notification bell and you won't miss the next video. Also, can you leave a comment below the video on which of these projects you found to be the most interesting?